Hey everyone, it's Jack G King from WhatCulture.com. Apologies if the audio is a little bit shaky. Those selfish Adams took all the audio equipment and the batteries to New York with them. So not only are we stuck here in misty grey old England, but we're stuck without proper recording equipment. Cheers guys. Set of pricks. And you're watching, of course, the Fast Count. Now let's start off with all of this week's WWE news. First off, it's suspensions o'clock up in this bitch because three high-profile superstars from the WWE main roster have breached the wellness policy. First we learned of Alberto Del Rio, then Paige, and finally Eva Marie. There's been some talk of whether Eva's suspension is a work to fit in with her current storyline of missing matches and all that kind of thing. I'd personally say that it's not a work because I don't think WWE would make light of the wellness policy. They'll want to keep that sort of a serious issue. I don't think they'd involve it too heavily in storylines. Of course they used Roman Reigns' suspension in storyline, but if they used it in this Eva Marie situation, I think that would count as maybe making light of it rather than using it in a serious manner. Secondly, apparently Goldberg is quite eager to return to WWE. The WCW legend recently talked about how he should have been the cover athlete or superstar for 2K17, replacing Brock Lesnar because he was the man who ripped his face off or smashed his face in or something. He said something generally grisly and violent, and we all love that as wrestling fans, don't we? He said that there has been a lot of talk about him possibly returning to the ring. He's received a lot of support and really wants to give the fans what they want. So fingers crossed we could see a return of Goldberg. We could potentially even see a rematch from that awful Lesnar v Goldberg match at WrestleMania, and hopefully if they were to fight again they could put on a contest worthy of such a billing. And in a sort of crossover between WWE and news from elsewhere, Jay Lethal recently confirmed on Jim Ross's podcast that he too would love to have a shot in WWE. The current Ring of Honor World Champion and WCPW alum, of course, recently talked to JR about how it was his fandom of the WWF that got him into wrestling and how his dream WrestleMania matchup would be against Chris Jericho, and that he'd love to one day get an opportunity in the company that made him such a fan. And now for all of the news from elsewhere in the wacky, the batshit world of professional wrestling. That one was a bit aggressive and I do apologise, but as you'll see, it's been a very, very eventful week outside of WWE. First of all, let's head straight off to Japan because Kenny Omega has won the G1 Climax and in doing so has become the first gaijin or non-Japanese wrestler to win the event. Last weekend, Omega beat Hiroki Goto in the finals of the G1 Climax, thereby, in theory, card always subject to change, but in theory, cementing his place in the main event of next January's Wrestle Kingdom. And as a little side note as well, Omega's penultimate match with Tetsuya Naito was awarded that coveted 5-star rating from Dave Meltzer. That's the second 5-star rating that Meltzer's thrown out in the past 2 weeks. Could he be getting more lenient? Probably not. It's probably just because both such matches were excellent. They were, of course, Kenny Omega v Tetsuya Naito, and the week before, Tomohiro Ishii v Kazuchika Okada. Now we move on to TNA, and it's a TNA doubleheader because how exciting is TNA? In fairness to the company, it is going through a period of change. They've of course brought in Aaron Stevens, Aaron Rex, the former WWE superstar Damien Sandow. They've also seen a change at the top because Dixie Carter is no longer the TNA president. That is now Billy Corgan, and he's been making a boatload of changes. The first we should talk about is the retirement of the King of the Mountain Championship and the establishment of a brand new title. That title is called the TNA Grand Championship, and intriguingly it seems to be borrowing a lot from the world of mixed martial arts. The belt will be fought for in a sort of 3-round format, and if there's no decision by the end of those 3 rounds, it'll go to the judges. It's very intriguing to see how this will work in a pro wrestling setup, and whether it'll seem too contrived or whether it'll bring a much needed dose of sort of realism and that hard edge that Japan has perfected so well in recent years, and whether it'll bring that to North American shores. And finally, Bobby Lashley, after winning 3 of the belts in TNA, has lost 2 of them, and I'm just devastated because you know that I was on the Bob train from the start when he won the X Division title to go with his TNA World Championship. Then he won James Storm's King of the Mountain Championship. Sadly, obviously Billy Corgan has retired the King of the Mountain Championship, and Lashley vacated the X Division Championship, which has now been won by DJZ. So poor Bobby, he's only the world champion now. He's probably not going to win the tag belts or the knockouts belts, and we were all looking forward to that so much, but I'm afraid I think it's probably time to get off the Bob train. Second time I've said Bob train now. If we could establish the Bob train as a thing, #Bob train. And now, is that a knock at the door? It is, because you phoned up the pizzas. Time for the takeaways this week. Delicious. Now it's time to take a little bit of a closer look at Kenny Omega's recent triumph. It's another example of New Japan's long-term, deeply embedded, masterful storytelling. Full credit to Gedo, the head booker over there. The most symbolic moment was probably when Omega rejected the chance to hoist the traditional flag that the G1 Climax winners lift, and instead was given a Bullet Club flag. He waved that around, and it's really another boost of momentum for Bullet Club, because that stable had been losing a little bit of momentum in recent months, it could be argued. Now, in theory, this means that Kenny will headline Wrestle Kingdom in January. Of course, the card is always subject to change, but if he retains that spot, and if the current champion retains his spot, we will see Okada v Omega. Now, who would win such a match? Because Okada has been booked very strongly ever since regaining his title from Tetsuya Naito. Omega is very much an up-and-comer. He's been with New Japan for a lot of years, but he's never really won the big one. He's never been regarded as a true heavyweight, you might argue. If Omega does win, this would put a whole new spin on things over in New Japan. It would send the promotion in a whole new direction. On the other hand, you can't really argue with Okada retaining either. He is, of course, the new ace of the company. He's taken over from Tanahashi. So it's really a win-win situation for New Japan at the minute, but it's fully deserved on the back of some excellent booking. Now let's briefly talk about tomorrow's NXT TakeOver Back to Brooklyn special. There's a lot of matches we could potentially focus on here. I'd like to focus on the two main title matches, Bayley v Asuka in that big rematch, and of course Samoa Joe v Shinsuke Nakamura. In both these matches, it's quite unpredictable who's going to win, but if things go as I'm kind of expecting them to pan out, and Asuka retains, and Shinsuke becomes the new men's champion, will Samoa Joe and Bayley, two of the more established members of the NXT roster, finally find their way to the main roster? In the case of Bayley, it seems only a matter of time before she ends up on Raw or SmackDown, whereas in Samoa Joe's case, I'm getting a little bit worried that WWE might be missing the boat on him. He is getting a little bit old now. It would be a terrible shame not to see him end up on Raw or SmackDown, because he's been such a brilliant wrestler over the past decade. One of the standout wrestlers for the past decade and a half, you might argue. And finally, SummerSlam, of course. There are about 25 matches on the card, it seems, but I'm going to focus on just one, the match for the new WWE Universal Championship between Finn Balor and Seth Rollins. I really want Rollins to win, I'll hold my hands up, but if Finn wins, I won't be too disappointed either, because I think if he was to win, this would really symbolise and be the first stepping stone in the establishment of the new era, as WWE is so keen to push down our throats. This would be the first step in legitimising that new era. So as much as I want Rollins to win, because he's my favourite wrestler at the moment, I wouldn't be too devastated if Balor were to win either, because it spells new and exciting things. So that's all we've got time for this week on the Fast Count. Once again, apologies if the audio has been a little bit shaky. It should be alright, but you know, if it's bad, blame Blompier and Pacitti for taking that audio equipment across the Atlantic, those devious men. Without further ado, I've been Jack from WhatCulture.com. You can follow me on Twitter at Jack_the_Jobber, and I'll see you soon.
This Monday, it's the final episode of WCPW loaded before our next special, Stacked. But before that, we've got one hell of an episode. Bea Priestley seeks to avenge her loss against Nixon Newell. Joe Coffey and Primate clash under hardcore rules. Team Hendry, as he insists it be called, battles Prospect. Martin Kirby takes on Will Ospreay in a potential Match of the Year candidate. And Aaron Stevens faces off against Big Damo for the WCPW World Championship. Hot damn. Tune in 10 p.m. BST on the channel.